When I first met my wife, we were head over heels in love with each other, and both of us knew almost instantly that we were meant to be together. My wife ended up getting pregnant while we were still dating, and we figured the right thing to do would be to get married. Everything felt natural for the first 5 years of our relationship. We were happily married, and we had a child together that we both loved dearly. I had a great job, and she stayed at home and took care of our child. Before we got together, she was actually engaged to another man. From what I was told, she broke things off with him a couple of weeks before I met her. She told me it just didn't feel right, and she didn't want to be with him. So, she broke up with him and moved out of his house. After that, she went out to a bar with her best friend, and that's where she met me. I always thought the timing of it was perfect. I thought it was fate. Had she not broken things off with that guy, we would have never been together, and I wouldn't have had the perfect life that I did. I traveled quite a bit for my job, which was never much of an issue with us. At the most, I would be gone from home for 2 or 3 days a month, and they were always weekdays. I was adamant with my employer that I wanted to be able to spend the weekends with my family so we could make memories together. The first instance that I noticed something was off was when I was on a short work trip. I had to fly into Montana for a meeting with a client, but they ended up canceling at the last minute while I was there due to a family emergency. I decided I'd take the extra time and surprise my family with a weekend trip to the beach or something. I got on the next flight home and called my wife when I arrived at the airport. She didn't answer the first couple of times that I called. That was very unlike her. She would always be by her phone, and not answering was strange. Eventually, she picked up the phone to see what was going on. She seemed annoyed that I called her. She rarely ever had that tone with me, especially when I was out of town. I asked her if everything was okay, and she kind of snapped at me to tell me that it was. I told her that I was in an Uber on my way home, and she seemed shocked. I heard a lot of shuffling around in the background, but at the time I assumed she was moving around. I never thought anything suspicious was happening. She got off the phone with me, and when I arrived home she was very disheveled. Her cheeks were pink like she had been running around, and she was wearing some pajama shorts and a sweater that was on inside out. I knew that being alone with the kid was sometimes exhausting, but it didn't seem like that was the issue. I asked her if everything was alright, and she told me that it was. She was just surprised to see me so early. I told her about my plan to spend the weekend by the beach, and she immediately rushed off to start packing so we could leave in the morning. She seemed relieved to get away from me. I unpacked my work stuff and went to pack some garments for the trip, and I found a black sock that I didn't think was mine. I picked it up and showed it to my wife, asking what it was. It was a suspicious thing to find. She was confused about what I was asking, swearing that the sock was mine. I'm not going to lie, she was the one who handled all of the laundry in the house. She bought a lot of my clothes and probably knew my wardrobe better than I did. I told her that I didn't think it was mine, but she was steadfast in saying that it was mine. Eventually, I gave up and I believed what she said. I figured she would know better than me about it. Several months passed, and I didn't notice anything else going on. I had completely forgotten about the sock thing by that point. One day I came home from work early and I found my wife in our bathtub crying. There was no water in the bath, and she was fully clothed, just hiding in the bathtub crying. I immediately rushed over to her and asked her what was going on, checking on her to make sure she was okay. She was almost nonverbal and unable to communicate what was happening to me. I was freaking out, and I rushed around the house to check on our kid to make sure they were all right. I called her mom and asked what was going on. She didn't know either. My first instinct was that somebody had died, but when I spoke to her mother, the person who would have likely elicited that reaction out of her, I started to think something else was going on. I checked our Ring camera footage to make sure nobody broke into the house, but I didn't find anything there. The only thing that was left for me to do was look at her phone and see if that was any sign of what was going on. It wasn't something I was doing to try to catch her in anything. My wife was hysterical and crying, and I needed to figure out what was going on so I could help her. She had it with her in the bathtub, and I went over to her to grab it from her hands. She put up a little bit of a fight, giving it to me. I unlocked it, and the screen that it was open to was a message exchange between her and a man we will call Tim. The messages were all very romantic in nature. They were telling each other that they loved each other, that they missed each other, and how excited they were to be together when I went away the following week. I didn't know what to do. My wife was hysterically crying in the bathtub, and I cared about her, and that was heartbreaking to see. but I had also just found out that she was cheating on me. That didn't even explain why she was crying the way that she was. Their messages didn't end with a breakup or anything like that. While I was looking, a message from her best friend, let's call her Carol, came through. I didn't read the message, but I called her right away and asked her if she knew about what was going on. I told her that I knew all about Tim, and I just needed to know why my wife was crying in the bathtub. Carol told me that Tim was my wife's ex-fiancé. They had reconnected and were seeing each other. The reason my wife was crying was because Tim had died. I felt so many different emotions at that time. It's honestly so unexplainable how I felt. I was angry and heartbroken about the affair I felt for my wife because I did love her, but I was so mad at her. I wanted to reach out and help her, but I also wanted to be as far away from her as I possibly could. I told Carol that she needed to come over and tend to my wife because I didn't think I could. I walked out of the bathroom, and my wife yelled after me, begging for me to come back and be with her. I packed a bag for our kids so we could go stay at my parents' house for a few days. They didn't need to be around my wife while she was mourning. It would likely be pretty jarring for them. When Carol came over, I left. She tried to explain to me what was happening before I could leave, but I didn't want to listen to her either. Carol was my wife's best friend, but we were on good terms. I would joke around with Carol, and I invited her out for dinner and drinks with us all the time. I felt betrayed that she even lied to me about the affair. I explained everything to my parents when we were at their house, and they gave me some really good advice about the matter. I felt bad about my decision to walk away from her, but they told me that she already made that decision for me. Even though I knew she was mourning, I couldn't be with her. She betrayed our marriage, and the only thing left for me to do was leave her. She made her choice, and I wasn't responsible for her emotions after she hurt me. I gave her the weekend at home alone to deal with everything she had to. When I returned the following week to gather some of my belongings, she begged for the chance to explain herself to me and work on the problems. I told her that there was no explaining that she was telling another man that she loved him and sleeping with him behind my back. However, I did find out that she actually was still engaged to her fiancé when we met. She and I had been dating for an entire month before she broke things off with him. I was supposed to just be a fling, but then he found out about me, and they broke up. I don't know if she thought that was going to make the situation any better, but it certainly didn't. I knew then that she had been a liar throughout the entirety of our marriage. I told her that I was leaving her, and that there was no swaying my mind on the matter. I knew that she was still very emotional from Tim's death, but that wasn't any of my concern. I started filing for divorce, and as I was doing that, so many people from my life reached out to me and tried to make me out as a villain. My wife had been telling everybody that I left her after she found out somebody close to her died. She was withholding the fact that she found out the man she was cheating on me with died. I made sure to clarify that to everybody who reached out to me so they knew the truth. I wasn't going to let her lie about me and make everybody we knew think I was some awful man. After that, everybody saw how manipulative she could be, and from what I understand, she lost a lot of friends in our town. The only person who stuck by her was Carol, who was the only other person who knew about the affair when it was happening. We ended up getting divorced, and I kept the house and all of our assets. She moved in with her parents and comes by on the weekends to see our child. OP, I can't even begin to understand the emotions that you were feeling when you found out about your wife's affair. It wouldn't have been fair for you to have to sit there and comfort her while she was crying about Tim's death. I think you did the right thing by leaving and calling Carol to go take care of her. Your wife lied to you from the start of your relationship. It was her own fault that you guys ended up divorced after everything. It's a shame that Tim died. I don't know what happened to him, but your wife's grief shouldn't have had anything to do with you. I think it's in poor taste that your wife told people in town that you left while she was grieving. It definitely seems like she was trying to turn the tides in her favor before others found out about the divorce. It's a good thing that you told everybody the truth so they could see her true colors. Now let's move on to our next story for today. My girlfriend and I both met during our junior year of college. We went to a small school, and it was hard not to notice everyone on campus. I'd seen her around from time to time, and I thought she was attractive. However, I never had a reason to go talk to her. We both ended up in the same writing class during the first semester of our junior year. As soon as I saw her, I sat down next to her and struck up a conversation. We ended up hitting it off, and we workshopped a lot of things together for the class. A few weeks into the semester, I made a move on her, and she seemed glad that I did. The first summer that we were apart was difficult because we weren't used to long distance. We lived about 4 hours away from each other, so we weren't able to see each other very often. We talked every day, and we ended up making a couple of trips to each other to hang out over the summer. When the fall semester of our senior year started, we were very happy to finally be back together. Everything was great between us when we started. I didn't notice anything strange going on between us, so I was maybe a little oblivious to some things. In hindsight, I can see how she wanted to hang out with me less and was using her course load as an excuse. I had seen her schedule at the beginning of the semester, and she had a relatively light course load. She had a job, but she only worked at it part-time. There was definitely time for her to go on more dates with me or spend more time with me. She just didn't want to. Whenever we were together, she would be on her phone a lot, and she was often pretty secretive about what she was doing on it. Things continued like that all the way until the spring semester. I had brought up a couple of times how I was feeling, but she assured me both times that she wanted to be with me and that she was just busy or stressed. One night, I texted her and asked her if I could come over to her room and spend the night with her. It was a Friday night, and I knew that she didn't work in the morning, and I just wanted to be with my girlfriend. She replied a few minutes later and told me that she had a migraine from looking at a computer for too long and was about to go to sleep. I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw a notification that my girlfriend was online. She told me she was going to sleep because she was looking at a screen all day and had a headache. I figured that she was lying to me about that and just didn't want to be with me because she was scrolling on Instagram. It was painful to have that realization, but I think it was something that I kind of needed. I was a little upset about it, so my roommate asked me about what was going on. I explained everything to him, and he told me that it sounded like she was over the relationship already. Then he casually mentioned that she was probably already talking to someone else. I didn't see the correlation right away, but he encouraged me to look into it. I didn't really think much about it right away, but after a few days of stewing on what he said, I decided that maybe it would be worth looking into. She really didn't want to spend a lot of time with me, and she was on her phone quite a bit being secretive about it. It made sense that she could have been hiding something from me. I looked online for some clues about how to tell if someone's cheating, and I evaluated my relationship against those. I took a mental note of what her Snap score was if she was online after she told me she was going to sleep, and how often she was turning me down when I asked if we could go on dates or be together. From everything I found, signs are pointing to her possibly being with someone else. One weekend, we made plans to go to a concert together. I bought the tickets and everything. She backed out at the last minute and told me that she had to work. She never worked on Saturdays, so right away it seemed like a lie to me. I told her that I was okay with it, and that I would bring my roommate along to the concert with me instead. I told him what happened, and he got it in my head that she was canceling to be with another guy. I let him convince me of that, and I was pretty frustrated and anxious about everything. I checked her Snap score while we were on our way to the concert, and saw that it had been increasing while she was supposed to be at work. I could also tell through the maps on Snapchat that she was at a restaurant in the city, not at her job near our college campus. My roommate decided that instead of going to the concert, we were going to go see what was going on in that restaurant. When we got there, she was clearly on a date with a guy. They were sitting next to each other, and he had his arms around her while they were laughing and getting very cozy. We even saw them kiss a few times. I was heartbroken to see that everything my roommate had been saying was true. She had been cheating on me and lying to me throughout the year. I didn't know how long it had been going on, but she had been behaving a certain way for a while. While we were waiting, my roommate started looking through her social media profiles to try to figure out who the guy was. He put the pieces together relatively quickly, and found out that the guy she was on the date with was her stepbrother. I knew that her parents were divorced, and her mother had married pretty hastily during the spring semester of our junior year. However, I had never met her family. We hadn't been dating for that long, and her family never visited for family weekend or anything like that on campus. I was shocked that she was cheating on me with her stepbrother of all people. I told my roommate that I was going to confront her the following day and end everything with us. He was the one who convinced me to go about it a different way. He helped me plan how I was going to get revenge on them both. Her family didn't come to visit for small things, but I knew that they were coming in for our graduation ceremony. I pretended like everything was normal with us up until then. Every year, the day before our graduation ceremony, our university held a large banquet for the students and their family members. My girlfriend and I had planned on attending that together with our families so we could all meet each other. Everything was going very well at first. Everybody was getting along, and I was honestly drinking a little too much wine. The president of the university was scheduled to give a speech at the dinner, so there was a live microphone on the stage in the room. I was feeling a little confident, so I made my way over to the microphone. The faculty around me were a little surprised, but they didn't stop me right away. They probably should have. I started off by congratulating all of my fellow classmates on making it through the year to get to graduation. I turned my attention to my girlfriend, and many people in the room turned and looked at her while I was speaking. At first, it seemed like I was just talking about how lovely she was. Then I mentioned how I was surprised to see her on a date with her stepbrother. The room went silent when I brought that up. Everybody was taking in the gravity of what I'd said. They were both shaking their heads and denying it. I explained that I saw them kissing each other and how she was cheating on me with him throughout the entire year. People were pulling out their phones to record what I was saying, but I was ushered away from the microphone by one of the faculty members before I could get into a lot of the details. However, her mother and stepfather were asking her a lot of questions, and she was trying to answer them. My parents pulled me out of the room and asked me about why I would embarrass her that way. I was just laughing, and I ended up leaving. My girlfriend texted me later that night and told me about how much I humiliated her in front of the entire class. I didn't really care. She had been lying to me and treating me like I was garbage for an entire year, and I finally found out why. I thought she deserved to be a little bit embarrassed about everything. Our graduation ceremony was the following day, and people were still talking about the dinner. I could see that my girlfriend was embarrassed and could feel people talking about her behind her back throughout the entire ceremony. I really think I ruined that for her. That was a few years ago, but I am now over what happened. I realize that not everybody is going to be the way that she was. However, I am now very aware of signs of cheating, and I keep an eye out for that in my relationships. OP, it seems like your girlfriend was demonstrating a lot of the classic signs of cheating. It's good that your roommate was able to notice that and open your eyes to it when it seemed like you didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I think telling everybody in your graduating class about the affair was pretty funny. She did deserve to get called out for cheating and lying, especially since it was with her stepbrother. It seems like they hadn't known each other for very long, but the fact that they were related by marriage is just weird. I can't help but think that most of the embarrassment she felt was because of their relationship to each other more so than the actual cheating. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife and I had been together for 10 years in total. We got married 2 years into our relationship and I thought she was the love of my life. I wanted to be with her forever, die next to her, and spend the rest of my life next to her in the ground. Instead, she ruined all of that because she wanted some excitement in her life. When we met, our relationship was like a whirlwind. I could hardly imagine breathing without her next to me. We wanted to be together all the time, and we did everything together. There was so much passion in our relationship. Over time, that passion didn't disappear completely, but it diminished. I thought it was to be expected in a relationship that lasted as long as ours. We knew everything about each other. There was hardly anything left for us to learn. We were both busy with work and establishing our lives. We loved each other, but the fiery passion that we had was stifling. She came to me and told me about it one day, and I listened to her while she complained about it. I told her that I was happy to try what I could to reignite it. However, I didn't feel like it was gone completely. She wanted us to go and do more spontaneous things and have more adventures in our lives. I wanted that too, but it was difficult when you were working parents balancing family life and work. I didn't know when we would have the time to do all the things that we normally did and add weekend trips or date nights into the mix. After we had the conversation, I kept thinking about it and I made sure to plan a few surprise date nights over the months that followed. It was really all I had the time to do with everything else on my plate. She seemed very appreciative of those gestures, and after a while, she stopped bringing it up. Around July, she started taking longer days in the office. She worked in advertising, so I knew that she often had late meetings with clients overseas, but she was never out until past 7 p.m. at the time. She was staying out until 8 or 9 p.m. She would come home and the kids would already be asleep. She never wanted to talk about what she was doing at work either. She would come home and tell me that she was too exhausted to go over it all and she would hop in the shower then go to bed. When I would ask her about it the following day, she would just tell me it wasn't important. It started once a week, but gradually it increased to 2 or 3 times a week. She stopped asking me about date nights or spontaneous activities. One Saturday, when we were planning on going to the beach with our kids, I walked into her bathroom to find her taking pictures of herself in her bathing suit. From the position that she was in, they were very sensual pictures. It wasn't just a quick picture at all. It was like she was posing in them. I asked her what she was doing and she just shrugged off the question and told me that she felt confident in the bathing suit and wanted to document it. I couldn't argue with anything like that. If she felt good in her skin, that was great for her. In hindsight, I knew that she was sending them to someone else. We went to the beach and we got everything set up for the day ahead. I was focusing on playing with the kids while my wife was lying back and tanning. I was helping my son build a sand castle when a man walked up to my wife. She stood up and hugged him while she was in her bikini, mind you. It was hard not to notice the hand placement on her lower back as they embraced. It raised a lot of red flags for me. Immediately, I walked over to them and introduced myself to the man. He was good-looking, a lot younger than my wife, probably in his mid-20s. I found out Henry we'll call him, was a recent hire at the company my wife worked at. They made a big deal about how it was such coincidence that they ran into each other at the beach. Apparently, he had gone there alone and my wife invited him to join us. I was a little taken aback by it. I thought we were going there to spend time with our kids and she was inviting this coworker to join us. I couldn't say anything about it there, so I just welcomed him. I went back to playing with my children while I kept an eye on my wife and Henry. They were having a wonderful time together, talking and laughing. They even went off to walk in the water together. I went with my kids to the water and we started collecting shells. Because my kids were in the water, I was paying very close attention to them and I wasn't looking at my wife. When we were finished, I went to take my kids back to our spot and saw that my wife and Henry were both gone. Right away, I was suspicious. I looked around to see if they were walking around the water or maybe on the boardwalk or pier, but I didn't see them anywhere. I sat down with my kids and put some more sunblock on them while they ate some of the snacks that we brought with us. After about 10 minutes, my wife and Henry found us on the towels. They were each carrying a few ice cream cones in their hands and they told me that they had gone to go grab them. There was an ice cream shop on the boardwalk within my view and I didn't recall seeing them there. On top of that, they were making it seem like there was a long line, but if that was the shop they went to, I knew there wasn't. I could tell that they were lying. I just didn't know why they were lying about going off with each other. When we got home later that night, I asked my wife about it, telling her that I was a little suspicious about what happened. She laughed at me like it was crazy for me to think something was going on. She made me feel like an idiot for even thinking about it. Nothing she said eased my mind at all. I was still very suspicious about whatever she had going on with Henry. After the beach, the late nights kept happening and I felt like she was withdrawing from me even more than she was before. That went on for a couple of months until I gave in and decided to hire a private investigator. It felt like an invasion of privacy and I never wanted to be that partner, but there was something wrong and my wife clearly wasn't going to be honest with me. The private investigator kept an eye on my wife for about a week before he came back to me with some intel. He produced several pictures of my wife with Henry. They were in their office after hours when everybody else had gone home. On top of that, he provided me with some video evidence of my wife sneaking out of my house in the middle of the night to meet Henry in his car. They had sex right there in our driveway. I knew something was happening, but seeing the evidence made it real. It hurt more than anything I could have ever imagined. Honestly, when I saw it, a part of me died. I didn't know what to do. I thought she was the love of my life. She was my wife and she was who I decided to spend my time on Earth with. I thought about what the investigator showed me over the next couple of days, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the information I had. There was no way I would stay with my wife after what she did. After seeing the video of her sneaking out of our house, I knew that she went to sleep with him that day at the beach. Something in my gut told me that was the case. I didn't want to just divorce her though. I wanted to get some kind of revenge on her. I really wanted her to regret what she did. It was the end of September when the private investigator gave me the information that he did. Every Halloween, my wife and I threw a Halloween party for all of our friends and coworkers. We both loved the holiday and we went all out for it. I got my mom to watch our kids so we could actually let loose and not have to worry about them for a little while. I figured that humiliating my wife in front of all of her friends and coworkers was a worthy punishment, so I played it cool throughout the month and I helped plan the party knowing that I was going to ruin it for her. When the day finally came, everybody showed up and of course she invited Henry. He was very friendly with my wife and they were obviously eyeing each other all night long. About halfway through the party, before everybody was too drunk to forget about what I was going to say, I stood up on the coffee table and got everyone's attention. When everybody was looking at me, I told them everything. I told them about how I found out my wife was having an affair and how I thought she even snuck off while she was spending time with me and her kids to sleep with Henry. My wife tried to physically drag me down from the coffee table, but I wouldn't let her. She told me that it was not true and she told everybody else that I was just drunk and didn't know what I was talking about, but I had photographic evidence and I showed that to everyone. I think everybody at the party took that as a cue to leave early. When everyone was gone, my wife confronted me about it and told me that I humiliated her. All I did was ask her why she did it. She told me that she needed the excitement and with Henry it was there. It wasn't that he was any different than me. He didn't offer her anything that I couldn't, but she was excited about the affair. They were spontaneous and they would have sex in public quite often. That was what she wanted when she asked me about our passion dying out. She tried to frame it as my problem. I wouldn't sneak off with her at restaurants to sleep with her in the bathroom, so it was my fault she cheated. She even told me they started sleeping together in the office because there was so much risk involved. She was right about that. There was a lot of risk involved with that and I was going to make sure she knew that. I told my wife that I was going to be divorcing her and that I wanted her to get out of the house. Thankfully, she understood where I was coming from and she went to stay with her friend for a while. The following day, I reached out to the HR department at my wife's work and I told them about what was happening. I sent them the pictures I had of her and Henry at the office. I found out that both my wife and Henry were fired from their jobs. My wife was pissed off at me about that and she told me that because I got her fired, she was going to be going after alimony and the divorce settlement. We went through the divorce and I kept everything and she was owed absolutely nothing from me. When I explained what happened at the beach, I think that sealed her fate for custody as well. I was awarded custody of the kids, but she still had visitations and weekend visits. Now she's petitioning to have custody again. The thing is, she's a good mom, but her actions at the beach kind of made me worry that she might not always have her kids' best interest in mind. I'm focusing on my family right now. Divorce is difficult for kids, and I want to make sure they are adjusting as well as they can. I don't know if I'll be dating anytime in the future, but I'm open to possible connections happening organically. OP, your wife did come to you and she expressed how she felt, but it doesn't seem like she really gave you much of a chance to fix the issues she saw in the relationship. It is natural for the passion to die down after a while in a relationship, so it seemed like she was really grasping at straws for something. I think that cheating and using needing excitement as an excuse is pitiful. She threw away her life and family for a little excitement. There is never a good excuse for it, don't get me wrong, but that seems like a cop-out. I agree. I think her actions at the beach definitely make it seem like she might not be looking out for your children as much as you. I think she'll have a hard time swaying any judge in her direction for custody. It's good that they both got fired from their jobs. It seems like she knew from the moment that she met him that she wanted to sleep with him, and that's what she did. Anyways, let's now move on to our next story. My girlfriend and I started dating in college during our senior year and we had been together ever since. After graduation, she and I moved into a house with a couple of our other friends from school. None of us had great jobs, so we were kind of forced into that living situation because it was all we could afford. At the time, we didn't think about the issues that we would face living together so soon in our relationship. Now, as an adult with more experience, I would never start living with someone after only dating them for 6 months. At the time though, it seemed like the best thing in the world. During the pandemic, we were both working at home, sharing a bedroom, and virtually unable to leave the house. Don't get me wrong, I loved her. Even though we had our difficulties, she was somebody that I saw myself being with forever. I honestly figured that a lot of the issues that we had were because of our proximity and just being around each other 24/7. Everybody needs space in a relationship and it wasn't possible for us. When things started to improve and we were both able to work hybrid in our offices, we were very excited. I felt like we had some breathing room again and the relationship started getting back to normal. We also started doing things to spend a little more time apart. That sounds bad, but I think we both realized it was what we needed for the relationship. I was very active in the fitness community and she was learning how to play the guitar. After a couple of months of us being apart more often, things started to feel like they were back to normal. Throughout our entire relationship, our sex life had always been amazing. Even when we were arguing with each other, it never really slowed down. I started to notice after we were spending more time apart that she seemed less interested in me. I was so used to us having sex at least 4 or 5 times a week that it struck me as odd. I was the only one initiating it when it happened, which was also unusual. She didn't seem disinterested, but when we were finished there was a disconnect. We weren't cuddling as much or there wasn't as much pillow talk after. It felt impersonal. Over time, sex with us became more of a rarity. I talked to some of my friends about it and they told me that it could be normal in long-term relationships to feel that disinterest. They also suggested that maybe my girlfriend was having a tough time emotionally or mentally. I decided to talk to her about it one night and she told me that there wasn't anything going on, that she just hadn't been thinking about it. We ended up having sex after that conversation when we both established what was going on. I won't get into all of the gory details, but a couple of weeks later I started noticing some issues I was having with my genitals, so I went to the doctor. He told me that I had an STD. I was surprised to hear that and immediately thought it was wrong. The only person I was having sex with was my girlfriend, and I knew that she and I were both negative for everything. Admittedly, we weren't testing often because when we started dating we were both negative for everything. I figured it must have been something that I picked up at the gym or from sharing a drink with someone, but the doctor told me that the likelihood of me getting the particular disease that I had that way was slim. There was a 99% chance that it was transmitted to me sexually. I drove home and thought about how I was going to tell my girlfriend. At the time, it never occurred to me that she was the one who gave me the STD. I trusted her and I never would have thought that she would do something to hurt me, but eventually I started to put the pieces together. Obviously, I had to get the STD from somewhere. If I didn't get it through other means, the only way that I got it was through my girlfriend. The question was, how did she get it? I started thinking about how distant she had been and how much time we were spending apart, and it clicked. She must have been having some kind of affair. I figured that if she lied about it, as long as she did, she probably wasn't going to tell the truth when I confronted her. I wanted to see what was happening without allowing her to cover anything up or lie about it. She knew that I was going to the doctor because of an issue that I was having, so it was very likely that she was already aware of the STD. She had to have had it too. I composed myself and prepared for all the questions she was probably going to ask me. When she did, I told her that the doctor examined me and ran some tests, but I wouldn't know the results for a few days. I figured that would give me some time to do some digging and see what was really going on. Later that night, I went through her phone. I saw a recent text message chat with her guitar instructor and I clicked on it. Their most recent messages were talking about how I was going to the doctor to get tested. They were both swearing up and down that they didn't have any symptoms and didn't know, but they both plan on going too. That alone told me that they were sleeping together, but I read through other messages while I was looking. It seemed like my girlfriend met him in a cafe and started talking to him about starting guitar lessons. From there, she decided to go, and after her first lesson, he told her he liked her. She actually told him that she had a boyfriend and he said that he didn't care. From there, they came up with a plan to hook up for the first time without me knowing. It was a tricky situation trying to figure out how to break up with my girlfriend. We still lived together and we were on a lease together, which legally bound us to stay in the same apartment. However, when we moved in, all of us got together and made a roommate agreement that we all signed where we went over some house rules. We wanted a drama-free, good environment for everybody to live in. If we felt like there was any sort of hostility or negativity, if we had a majority vote, we could get somebody else to move out. I didn't know if a document like that would hold up if I wanted my girlfriend to move out, but I figured I could at least bring it up. I sent myself evidence from those messages and I pretended like everything was fine for the next couple of days. I read through our lease and the document that all 4 of us made together to try to figure out what my best option would be. I wanted my girlfriend out of the house. I knew it was going to be a struggle for her to find another place to live and to pay for it on her own, and I wanted her to go through that. My girlfriend kept asking me about the results of my test and I kept lying to her and telling her that I was still waiting. I pulled my other roommates aside one day while she was out for her guitar lesson and I told them about what was going on. They were as shocked as I was by the news, but they seemed to be on my side. She was a liar and she was a cheater who would take that side. I told them about the document and they said that if I wanted to stay they would be on my side and would do what they had to help get her to leave. She came home later that day to find all three of us sitting in the living room and waiting for her. I told her everything, telling her that she transmitted an STD to me because of her affair and that I knew about what was happening with her guitar instructor. She tried to apologize and pull me aside to explain what was happening in more detail, but I didn't want to listen. I told her that we needed to talk about the living arrangements because I was breaking up with her. After that, she started getting defensive. She clearly didn't want to move out. Our other roommates were on my side and they were with me in voting to kick her out of the house. She said that she was going to stay because the document we had wasn't legally binding, but one of my roommates brought up that since we all agreed to it and signed it, it would likely hold up in court. I told my girlfriend that I was willing to go to court over the matter. I think she realized that the living situation was going to be uncomfortable and she decided that moving out would probably be the best option for her. While she was in the process of doing that, I ended up going home for a week to avoid her. While I was there, I just kept thinking about the guitar instructor and how he said he didn't care that she was in a relationship. Clearly, if he was transmitting an STD to her, he was sleeping around recklessly. I looked him up online and I saw that he had a decent following for his social media accounts. He was trying really hard to make a name for himself as a musician. A lot of the followers that he had thought he was cute and were shooting their shots with him. I decided to put an end to that. I commented on a bunch of his posts about how he gave an STD to my girlfriend. I left reviews on his business accounts and I even made a TikTok to make a video explaining everything. He blocked me when he realized what was happening, but I made more accounts. It was the point where he was turning comments off on some of his videos. The thing about not having comments on videos is that it gets less engagement. He was getting much less traction than he was before, which was my goal. When my girlfriend officially moved out, I went back home and I was happy to be without her. I'm just glad that it's over now. OP, it sounds like the relationship in general was pretty toxic, but it is a shame that it took an affair to bring attention to that. The pandemic put a lot of stress on a lot of couples, so I can understand what was happening with you guys then. It definitely seems like your girlfriend was looking for some kind of way out, and she found it with a guitar instructor. Cheating is never okay. If you're unhappy in a relationship, you should end it over cheating. It's a shame that she went about her affair the way that she did. It's common sense that if you were cheating on someone, you should be using protection to avoid transmitting a disease to them. It is reckless, immature, and frankly, disgusting. It's nice that your roommates were on your side and voted to kick her out of the apartment. No doubt that caused some extra drama with the house, and it seemed like they were averse to that. But now that she's gone, everything is probably going to be pretty good for you guys. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. I, 34 male, and my wife, 30 female, met at a wedding for a mutual friend. She was one of the bridesmaids, and I couldn't take my eyes off of her throughout the ceremony. During the reception, I asked her to dance, and we connected. We exchanged information and scheduled our first date with each other for the following weekend. The time we got to spend together was amazing, and I'm confident in saying that I fell in love with her right then. We dated for a year and a half before we got married. It was somewhat of a whirlwind romance, and we didn't want to wait much longer. Some of our family and friends thought that it might have been a little too soon, but they knew how passionate we felt about each other. When we first started dating, I had an amazing job. I made twice what my wife made every year with a little more to spare. We had some long conversations after we were married, and we decided it would be best for her to quit her job. She had wanted to focus on building a business of her own anyway, so we thought it would be good for her to do that while I continued working. During the early years of our marriage, we had a lot of conversations about starting a family. It was something that I wanted to do down the line, but I wanted to spend a few years with just my wife. I wanted to travel and explore the world in my free time, and having a child was going to make that difficult. I was under the assumption that she had an IUD and things were being taken care of on her end to avoid pregnancy, so I was very surprised when she was waiting for me at home one evening to tell me that she was pregnant. I didn't know how it happened, and she explained to me that it's possible that an IUD isn't 100% effective. I didn't know how any of that worked at the time, so I didn't question it. It took me by surprise, and my reaction wasn't exactly what my wife was hoping for, so she was hurt that I wasn't immediately excited about it all. I assured her that I was excited about having the baby, but it was just a lot sooner than I thought it would be. Everything with the pregnancy went well and my wife gave birth to a very healthy baby girl, and our lives have been completely different ever since. I love my daughter more than anything in the world, and I would burn down an entire city for her if I needed to. That being said, my wife had a funny way of reminding me how I reacted when I found out about the pregnancy. After our daughter was born, my wife put her business on the back burner to take care of her. I understood doing that for a little while, but I had personally invested a lot of money in the business she wanted to start. I was encouraging her to get back at it because I didn't want to lose all the money that I put into it. She was frustrated with me for suggesting that. She saw herself as a full-time mother, and the business was no longer a concern of hers. I was able to sway her to focus on it while she took care of our daughter. Don't get me wrong, I understood where she was coming from, but she had been very adamant about me sinking thousands of dollars into her business before she got pregnant. Wasting all of that was not an option. For the first 3 years of our daughter's life, everything was going well with us. My wife was running her business, and it wasn't the most successful, but she was earning a modest income from it. Everything had been going very well with my job, and we were even thinking about buying a vacation house. Everything completely changed when I was unexpectedly laid off from my job. The company was going bankrupt, and they were making massive cuts. We had a decent amount in savings, and I was able to liquidate some other assets so we could live comfortably for a while I looked for another job. But there was a time when we were relying on my wife's business to make money. She didn't like that at all. She was angry with me for getting laid off. I could tell that she thought I wasn't working hard enough or giving enough to the job, and that made me the reason we were going through the troubles we were. She seemed to care less about me when I wasn't bringing in all of the money for the household. While I was unemployed and looking for a new job, I started to notice some changes with my wife. I was home all of the time, and she couldn't seem to get away from me fast enough. It seemed like the idea of sleeping with me made her angry, and she was dressing up a lot more than she normally did just to run errands like going to the grocery store. I thought she was acting strangely, but I figured it was just the stress of adjusting to everything we had gone through. One day, she told me that she was invited to grab drinks with one of her girlfriends and was going. I said goodbye to her that evening, and she came home drunk around midnight. I asked her about the time she had, but she wasn't interested in sharing too much. She was drunk and laughing, telling me it was a secret. I thought she was just being silly and would tell me the next day. When I asked her over breakfast, she said she hardly remembered. I didn't remember her being blackout drunk, so I thought that was odd. In hindsight, it was an excuse to avoid talking about it. I started to worry that something might be going on when she was going out more often with her friends. I assumed she was doing it to get away from the stress of things at home with me there. I never thought she'd be cheating. One night while she was out, I was putting our daughter to bed, and I felt that she had a slight fever. I knew the basics about what to do, but I didn't know where any child Motrin or anything like that was. So, I called my wife to see if she could help me. I called her several times and texted her, and she never answered. I understood that she was out with her friends and might not have been looking at her phone, but it seemed irresponsible. If there was an emergency or anything like that, I expected her to answer the phone. She came back later that night and immediately went to check on her daughter because she felt bad for not being there. She was a little bit drunk, but I tried to have a conversation with her about what was going on anyway. I aired all of my concerns about her not answering her phone and going out with her friends more often. She told me that it was unfair that I wanted her to just stay home and take care of the kid. She was framing it as me forcing an exclusively domestic lifestyle on her when I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. We got into a huge argument about all of that, and she basically told me that she was upset that I lost my job. Neither of us spoke to the other for a couple of days as we tried to get over what was said during the fight. During those days, she was getting a lot of phone calls that she would take away from me. I was curious about them, so I stood on the other end of a door and eavesdropped. She was whispering on the phone and explained to someone that she couldn't leave because her daughter was sick, but she told them that she missed them and couldn't wait to see them again in a few days. That wasn't how she spoke to her friends. It wasn't a platonic phone call at all. I pretended like I didn't hear what happened, and I went through her phone later that night. I saw that she had a text message exchange with a guy that she went to college with. He always had a crush on her, but she didn't reciprocate it. The guy was a highly sought-after lawyer in our area and married. That didn't seem to matter to either of them because they were having an affair from what I saw in the messages. They were sending each other nude pictures and explicit messages and scheduling times to be together. I noticed from the meeting times they set that they were all during the nights when my wife was supposedly out with her friends. The interesting part of their messages was how they all started. Days after I lost my job, she sent him a message asking if he knew of a good divorce attorney. He asked if everything was all right with us and wanted to help her if he could. She told him that our marriage wasn't working out and she wanted to get out before things got messy. I had no idea what she meant by that. Up until I lost my job, everything had been going great with us. I had never heard her. I hardly even raised my voice at her, so saying she was worried things would get messy was strange. From there, they started talking about their past and that she always had a thing for him. Whenever she would talk to me about him, she mentioned how pathetic his crush on her was. She made it seem like she thought she was so much better than him and wouldn't even consider being with him. Now she's telling him that she's always had a thing for him. I felt like a fool for believing what she told me. The relationship had been diminishing before my eyes, and I was too eager to ignore the signs. Seeing how her affair started after I lost my job put a lot of things in perspective for me. When we met, she was working and had a decent job, so I never assumed that she could have been with me for the money and stability that I offered. But in hindsight, she was very quick to leave her job and convince me she was going to run a business that she practically abandoned. I gathered as much evidence off of her phone as I could and I sent it all to myself so I could give it to my divorce attorney. If she thought for 1 second she was going to be divorcing me and taking half of my assets, she had another thing coming. On top of divorcing her, I wanted to get back at her for what she did. It was clear to me that she had been using me throughout the entirety of our marriage and I was angry. I took a little while to think about what I wanted to do and I came up with an idea. I called the lawyer that she was having an affair with and I had a conversation with him about wanting to sue my former employer for wrongful termination. I made it seem like there was going to be a big case that he was going to be unable to refuse. He and I were somewhat acquaintances, so I told him to bring his wife over to our house and we would have lunch together, all 4 of us. He tried to get out of it, but I insisted. Before we had our lunch meeting, I had a conversation with my wife about him coming over. I joked around with her about what she said about the lawyer in the past. She started talking about how he was in college and the weird things he was doing all while I was recording her. She said she thought he was pathetic and didn't understand how he landed someone like his wife. It was all just very mean. The day of our lunch meeting finally came and we all sat around on my back patio and got to talking. I casually mentioned that my wife mentioned she went to school with the lawyer. They both started talking about it fondly and reminiscing. I corrected my wife and told her that wasn't what she told me earlier. I pulled out my phone and played a recording of her calling him pathetic and an embarrassing loser. The lawyer was obviously very offended by it. Then I told him that I bet he wished he knew how she really felt before they had an affair. That caught everybody off guard and both of them tried to deny it. I told them there was no point in denying it and I knew everything. I also told them that I was in contact with a divorce attorney and I would be making sure my wife didn't get a thing from me. The lawyer and his wife got into an argument and she ended up leaving by herself. My wife didn't think about coming to me to clarify what was happening. Instead, she went to the lawyer and tried to explain why she said the things that she did. He clearly didn't believe her either. He must have had some inkling of how she felt at the time and hearing her say it finally confirmed it. I butted my head in and I explained to him that she was only really with me for the money. So when I lost my job, she was probably jumping over to him so she wouldn't have to work for anything. Part of me felt bad for him because I knew that she was manipulating him, but he knowingly slept with a married woman so he deserved whatever was going to happen to him after. I kicked my wife out of the house that night and she begged me not to because she said she didn't have anywhere else to go. She fought very hard to get a portion of my assets. It was very clear that she had one thing in mind during all of it and that was money. In the end, she didn't get anything from me. Not long after our divorce, I actually found an incredible job as well. If she had just stuck it out for a few months, none of that would have happened and she would have been more comfortable than she ever was. Instead, she had to be selfish and greedy and ended up losing everything in the end. OP, from what you described, it definitely seems like your wife was with you for the money. It's such a shame that it would have to be that way. It seems like you worked really hard to give your family a certain level of comfort and she took full advantage of that. I agree, it does seem like she was manipulating the lawyer to be on her side with things. Her telling him that she always had a crush on him when she knew how he felt about her was wrong. She had one thing in mind when she did that, and it was breaking up a family so she could step in and be with someone who could provide her a certain lifestyle. Her selfish actions broke up two families, and she really should be ashamed of herself. I think karma really got her in the end when she left with nothing at all. She didn't get anything from you, and from the way it sounds, the lawyer didn't want anything to do with her after he heard the truth. Now, for our next story. My wife and I both met when we were in our mid-20s at a club. I was there with my best friend, let's call him David, and I saw her from across the room. She was by far the best-looking woman in the building, and I wanted to shoot my shot with her. There were so many other men trying to get with her, but somehow I was the one she chose to be with. Every day since then she had chosen to be with me, and I was very grateful for that up until recently. We had been married for 8 years and everything was going well. We put off having children so we could focus on our careers, and we were finally in a place where we could try. Before we started trying to have our first kid, my wife and I wanted to have one last vacation on our own to sort of send off our life before kids. We invited David and his wife, let's call her Kelly, along with us. All four of us were looking forward to the trip for a while. We were going to the Caribbean and really looking forward to the wonderful views and all the activities we had planned. Leading up to the trip, my wife was kind of nervous about it. I didn't fully understand why she had flown on planes countless times before. I tried to comfort her as much as I could and tell her that the trip was going to be fine, but it didn't really seem to work much. The time came for all four of us to leave, and we got there without a hitch and settled into our hotel rooms. We actually had adjoining rooms which we all got a kick out of first. We made sure to lock our ends so our friends didn't walk into our room uninvited. Part of me thought that this trip was going to be almost like a second honeymoon for my wife and me. I was expecting it to be a little more passionate and intimate than it turned out to be. She wasn't really too eager about having sex with me the first couple of nights we were there. She told me that she was jet-lagged and just not feeling like herself, so I didn't pressure her into anything. All of us had managed to fully take the time off work for the vacation with the exception of one meeting that I had during the middle of it. It was something that I could hop on a Zoom call for a couple of hours and be done with. On the day of my meeting we spent the morning at the breakfast buffet, then I left to have my meeting. In the middle of it I could hear shuffling around in the room next door. I assumed someone just went in to grab something, but I didn't think too much about it. When it was over I went to the beach to meet up with everyone. Kelly wasn't there when I arrived. It was just my wife and David. They were laughing about something and I asked him what was so funny, but they just told me that it was nothing. They mentioned that Kelly went up to the room to get some rest because she had a headache. David was my best friend and I trusted my wife, so I never suspected anything was amiss. They were friendlier than they normally were with each other while we were on the beach, but I just thought they might have had a few too many drinks already. All of us went to dinner later that day and I thought I noticed David touching my wife. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. It looked like he patted her on the butt while they were walking by each other. I have been drinking, so part of me kind of assumed that I might have mistaken something that happened. I didn't make a big deal out of it. We went through the rest of dinner and I was a little bit on edge about what I saw, so I wasn't as jovial as I normally was. My wife and David kept looking at each other and smiling. It felt silly, but I was starting to worry that my wife and David were up to something. We got back to our hotel room and I asked my wife about it when we were alone. I was drunk by that point and my wife was as well. She told me nothing was happening. I explained the butt pat that I thought I saw and she told me that it didn't happen. I saw what I did, but I didn't want to believe it. I convinced myself that I was drunk and paranoid and it would be best if I just went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night and my wife wasn't there. I looked around for her and I didn't see her anywhere. I got up and started looking for her and saw that the door to the adjoining room was open just a crack. I knew for a fact we kept it locked, so it had to have been deliberately opened by my wife. I peeked inside David and Kelly's room and saw that Kelly was asleep in the bed and David was missing. The memories of the night before had come back to me and I started to put the pieces together, and I imagined that David and my wife were off somewhere together. Then I noticed the light to the large walk-in closet was on. I listened carefully for a moment and I could hear very soft stifled moans alongside some quiet shuffling coming from inside of the closet. I didn't want to open the door because I already had a pretty good sense of what I was going to see, but I knew that I needed to. I tipped it over as quietly as I could and stood in front of the door for a second before yanking it open. I saw exactly what I had anticipated. But that didn't make it hurt any less. My wife and David were in the middle of having sex with each other. When I opened the door and my wife saw me, she screamed. Kelly jolted awake in bed and yelled at me about being in her room, but then she realized what was really happening. Kelly stormed over to the closet and immediately started screaming at David about what he was doing. She mentioned how she was right not to have wanted to come on the trip with my wife and told him that they were done. I was really confused about what she was saying because they didn't seem hesitant about joining us on the trip at all. I asked for clarification and Kelly just looked at David and my wife waiting for them to elaborate. My wife finally spoke up and she confessed to me that she and David had slept together once before back home. David told Kelly about it because he felt bad and Kelly was able to forgive him as long as it didn't happen again. They both said that it was a mistake and it just happened and they regretted it. David and Kelly both promised not to tell me about what happened because they didn't know how I was going to react. So Kelly didn't want to go on vacation with the woman that slept with her husband. I could completely understand that. What I couldn't understand was why everybody thought it was okay to leave me in the dark about it. I was the only one who didn't know and I felt foolish for trusting David and my wife. I thought they made me look like an idiot. I went back to my room and my wife tried to explain it to me, telling me that it really meant nothing and that it was just sex. I didn't understand how that was justifying anything she said. Sleeping with somebody with no emotional connection didn't make it any better. She still cheated on me and that was what I cared about. David came into the room and tried to explain his side of everything to me and I ended up just punching him in the face. I do regret that because it wasn't exactly the most mature way to handle the situation, but I was in the heat of the moment and it felt right at the time. I ended up leaving the vacation the following morning and leaving everybody else behind. I went home to begin the divorce proceedings before my wife returned. I didn't want anything to do with her and I didn't want anything to do with David or Kelly. Kelly came back shortly after I did and she stopped by my house to apologize for keeping the secret. Apparently my wife had promised her that she was going to tell me and Kelly thought that she did. Otherwise she wouldn't have ever kept silent about it. I believed what she said. She had no reason to come over and lie to my face about it. My wife and David didn't come back home for an additional 3 days. I was already upset about the cheating, but the fact that they stayed behind on the vacation for an additional 3 days after everything happened was infuriating. I can only imagine the types of things they were doing while there for 3 days alone. I talked to Kelly after they came home and asked her what she was going to do. She told me that she had forgiven him once for cheating on her and wasn't able to do it again. She planned on leaving him and moving out of their house. I ended up divorcing my wife and Kelly divorced David. My wife and David tried to date each other for a while after everything happened and from what I understand it ended very badly. David cheated on my wife with a woman from his work and ruined their relationship. I just felt like that was karma coming back to get her in the end though. I am now happy away from both of them. I do check in with Kelly from time to time, but I try to stay away from her because it just reminds me of the times I had with David and my wife. But I'm now dating a wonderful girl and I realize that I'm going to have a lot of issues in my future relationships, but I'm trying to let myself be vulnerable and open again. OP, being cheated on is already terrible and it's made so much worse when the affair partner is a close friend. You trusted David and your wife and they betrayed your trust. It's such a shame that they would throw away their marriages for a seemingly meaningless fling they were having with each other. The fact that they had already slept together and felt bad enough about it to tell Kelly, then slept together again while Kelly was in the same room as them is insane. There was a thin door between David and his sleeping wife and he and your wife didn't care about that. That's just so disrespectful. I'm glad that you divorced your wife and you're no longer friends with David. I can understand how being friends with Kelly is something that reminds you of the times you had with both of them. They were people that you loved and trusted and they turned their backs on you, and remembering the good times is probably as painful as the bad times. It's good that you're dating again and being open about the issues that you might face in the future. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.